Welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. I'm joined now by Oguche Agudah, Managing Partner of HRISP Partners, to review some of our top stories in more detail. Good morning, Oguche.
Good morning, Malaka.
Great to have you on the show. So the first story I wanted us to discuss is this $1 trillion pay package for Elon Musk if the company hits certain performance milestones. So looking at some of the research, the $1 trillion pay package is bigger than 90% of African countries' GDPs. Like, you know, if you take most African countries, their GDP is smaller than $1 trillion. Given that we're talking about a CEO that runs an EV company, are we missing something here about the EV revolution because of the value that shareholders clearly place on the leader who runs such a company?
Yeah, I think EV is the future, especially of car manufacturing. If you look at the giants, when we grew up, Honda, Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, those were the big car companies. Now, Tesla has outpaced them in terms of market share and just in terms of market value.
Yeah.
And in terms of Elon Musk, people feel he's like once in a lifetime kind of individual. Some people liken him to Albert Einstein.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And those kind of people drive companies, those kind of people, and they need him focused because of what has happened with the US elections and he's losing focus. So the shareholders felt, let's incentivize him, let's keep him focused. So this pay package, he's not going to get paid a salary. The $1 trillion is on meeting some milestones. They hope he'll be able to produce 20 million Tesla vehicles, 1 million robo-taxis, and that's big in China now. Robo-taxis is big. So self-driving robo-taxis, and I think they think that's the future. They also hope that within that period, he can move the market value of Tesla to $8.5 trillion. So
that would be incredible.
They're giving him targets, and I think they're putting their money where their mouth is. Not everyone voted in favor. The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund didn't vote in his favor because of some concerns. But I guess in the end, shareholders know that if the company does well, they do well. So it's really about creating value. And I think that speaks to creating value. If you create value, you get paid well.
Yeah, it must be said that he's also getting 25% voting control as part of that deal. So that's really significant. Let's move on to another story. And I feel like this is something we've heard a lot before. Standard Chartered Bank CEO saying by a certain period, all money will be digital and blockchain. But if you look at it, if you bring it down to Africa, about almost 60% of the continent here remains unbanked. And we've been talking about how these new technologies will allow us to leapfrog. So can you even help us reconcile what this means globally in terms of the statement from the Standard Chartered Bank CEO and how we can even capture some of that value and innovation on the African continent?
Yeah, I think it's a rewiring of the whole financial system. So the Standard Chartered CEO speaking this is pointing us to the future, pointing us to where it's going. And it's not just him. Other global CEOs, in fact, BlackRock CEO also said that just in terms of tokenization, digital currency, crypto, and a number of the large banks are now using crypto, and crypto will now be mainstream. It might not happen now, but I guess it's in the future. I always liken it to football. I'm a football fan, and I always say, the greatest footballers, they go to where the ball will be, not where the ball is. So essentially, where we are today is where we are, but where will it be? Interestingly, I used to work for Standard Chartered Bank, and we launched the first ATMs in Nigeria more than 20 years ago. At that time, it was all cash.
Yeah.
So the financial system is moving, the financial world is moving. And I think for us in Africa is how do we now begin to posture to be able to capture some of that? Because in about 5 years' time, that's some of what they think. A whole lot of bank transactions will run on blockchain and this digital currency. Tokenization, even for investments. So investing in stocks, bond, real estate.
Absolutely.
Tokenization. So it's something that we in Africa and especially in Nigeria need to begin to think about and see how we can jump on that train.
No, for us here, interesting you mentioned your previous work in banking. The biggest disruption we've seen in banking over the last 10, 15 years obviously has been financial technology, fintech. And so the question is, of those who are playing in the fintech space, how many of them are actually adopting blockchain and these forms of financial intimidation to their business models? Do you see that growing as a thing?
Yeah, innovation is a bit tricky because as we speak now, in some hostels in Yaba, in some places in Silicon Valley, some people are building some stuff you don't know. So you wake up in the morning and you just see things have changed. So I guess it's in terms of strategy, in terms of what people are doing in the background, on the ground, and when it comes up, will you be ready? So the issue is not to wait for the future, but to predict it. To predict it. So we might not see it in the open, but I can tell you it's happening on the underground.
Yeah. Okay, so this third story, a statement by Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa. And of course, South Africa is a member of G20. I find this really intriguing and a bit perplexing because he's calling for an intergovernmental panel to tackle inequality. In my head, I'm thinking, let's start with our own countries. Why do we need another global panel similar to IPCC on climate to tackle inequality? Some of these issues are domestic and homegrown. I mean, what do you think of this suggestion from Ramaphosa?
Well, he's the president of G20 now.
Yeah, he is.
And I guess he has to do something. So this is his sort of landmark
his own baby project right?
for while he's the president. And he's saying we need to get a task force on this similar to climate. And he says the world knows there's a climate crisis, but does the world know that there's an inequality crisis? And he's calling for that intergovernmental partnership. Yes, I do agree with you to some extent that some of this is local. If you look at in Nigeria and South Africa, most things that cause inequality are things like financial inclusion. So if people are included in the financial system, able to get mortgages, able to get insurance, able to get loans, then it will help them cross the ladder up. So for us in Africa, we need to focus on financial inclusion. But then, there's some stats that says, 50% of the world's richest people, or 1% of the world's richest people, 50% of their wealth was gotten in the last 10 years. And all the new wealth in the world, they captured 40% of that. So I think it's looking at how wealth is distributed. There are many millionaires. We spoke about Elon Musk, probably be the first trillionaire. And then we have people who says 1 in 4 people in the world skip their meals in a day. And for us in Nigeria, we see it.
Yeah.
I think about the people selling plantain chips or selling stuff on the road. How do they feed? So I think for us in Africa, and what Cyril is trying to say is there has to be a global shift towards that. But I agree with you that most of the solutions are local.
In fact, local or maybe regional or Pan-African, that's a good place to start. Now, of course, you've seen the news on Nigeria's Eurobond and, it was oversubscribed, almost 500% oversubscribed, despite everything happening geopolitically. The question for me, given what has happened to developed market bonds, are investors, is this really a signal of long-term confidence in Nigeria, or are investors essentially chasing yield here? What is your thought on what has led to this outcome?
To be honest, I always say money has no color.
Yeah.
Right, and it's the yields.
Yeah.
Yes, we can spin it. And yet Nigeria has done quite well in the last 2 years in terms of macroeconomic fiscal. But in the end, for 10 years, if I'm receiving 8.6%, 20 years, 9.1%, I'll take it.
Right.
As opposed to I'm getting 2% in developed markets. So it's the yields, definitely the yields in my view. Yes, to some extent, what we've done in terms of trying to rewire the economy has helped. But in the end, money has no color. And if I'm an investor, in UK, Asia, banks, fund managers, pension funds, so the Eurobond was able to get a whole lot of people, various investors. But for them, if I'm investing 10 years and I'm getting 8.6%, I'll take it more than some of the bonds I'm getting.
And of course, the big question is what happens when there's a change in global monetary policy direction and how does this impact? But we can talk about this all day. I want us to quickly touch on Kaduna State spending about 70% of its budget on education. On paper, I think that's a fantastic thing. Yes. But if you look at the statistics in Kaduna State...
Katsina,
I beg your pardon, Katsina State, about 500,000 children
out of school.
Are out of school, even though last year, I think Katsina State government said that number had fallen by 300,000. So is this still really a drop in the ocean? Or is there another element that needs to complement this amount of expenditure on education?
Yeah, so UNESCO estimates that between 15 to 20% should be spent by states on education. And Katsina State, on paper, they're getting there about 17%. So that's a tick box. But I think in Nigeria, it's the quality of the spending.
Yes.
And I always say that, with our budgets and the way we look at our budgets as a country, we should look at outcomes as opposed to money. So it's not about 17%, it's not about 150-something billion, but what are you using that money for? It's not even about building classrooms, it's the social infrastructure in terms of teachers, in terms of the strategy, in terms of the structure. And I think that's what we miss. We throw money at problems, so it's good that they've upped the budget, but I think it's how. the human capital, who's monitoring the budget, and what's the quality. So do you have metrics in terms of how many people are out of school, the quality of education?
Yes.
So those are the things that I think we need to do. So it's commendable, but I also wanted to highlight the fact that budgets should be outcome-led, not just
Absolutely, very well said. And I look forward to us dropping those numbers down of out-of-school children, not just in Katsina, but across many other states in Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us, Oguche Agudah. Great to hear your views on these global business headlines. Thank you.